Perfect. Thanks. So, guys, first of all, it's an honor to be here with Luke and Nuno. First, I want to apologize for not having a slide as cool as Luke's on the last presentation. But anyway, let's get started. So, let me go to the first slide. So, why do we test our applications? There are numbers of reasons to test your applications. Sometimes people like to do test-driven development, to have tests drive their code. Some people care about the stability. Some people like to know that what they're doing is working as intended. Some people write code first and test later. But at the end of the day, the tests are there to ensure that you have a stable application. In the sense of it works as intended. You have tests covering the whole thing. And tests do work as an ego boost. I'm pretty sure anyone here on the live stream that has tested knows that you get pretty happy when you have some tests passing. But still, the reason you write tests is to have a stable application, to make sure that once a bug is spotted, you can go and write a test for that bug and make sure it never comes back. That's the reason we test at the end of the day. Why do we not test our applications? Again, several reasons. Sometimes you have a boss that doesn't allow it, and this happens very often when you have a boss that's a little bit technical, but not so technical that they really understand what happens. Sometimes upper management doesn't want you to waste time with tests. Sometimes you don't know how to test your applications, and sometimes there's a cost factor. Takes too much time. You have deadlines, and you won't be able to achieve them if you waste time writing tests. And sometimes you're working on a small project and you just don't feel like need tests. But yeah, the thing is, the tests are indeed expensive. You have to not waste. You have to spend time writing them. And if you work for someone, they're paying you to use the time. So sometimes it's hard to understand why you would spend time doing this instead of writing code. And move on. If you can writing a test, then the most obvious idea is to write the test for your app's core features. What do I mean with this? Imagine you have an e-commerce website. So you might not have the time to write tests for all of the pages, but if you do have some time to write tests, you should spend the time testing the checkout page, testing that users can add items to their cart, testing that users can register, because that's the core of the app. I mean, if the homepage is broken, okay, that's not a huge deal. Someone's going to spot it and you can fix it. But if the checkout's broken, you're literally losing money. And that's the what we usually do. We test what's the most important pieces of the app, and as we get more time, we start testing the less important pieces of the app. Well, before I go to this slide, let me talk real quick. So I like to think of tests kind of like stocks that pay huge dividends. It takes a while to write them. Sometimes they're complex and you spend quite a while writing them, but they pay off in the long run real quickly and much quicker than you expect to. So let's do some math. Let's say you work full time and you write 5 tests a day. I'm talking about all kinds of tests. It could be unit tests, it could be feature tests, but you write 5 tests a day. That might even be a small number. And you work 5 days a week. In a year, you're going to have 1,300 tests. If you do 5 pushes to the repository a day, 5 times a week, you have 25 CI pipeline runs in a week. So if you have, once you reach those 1,300 tests and you have them properly set up, you're running each week 32,000 tests. Every week, you're running 3,200,000 tests. So that's how tests scale. Now, bear with me for a while. Imagine, you don't have to imagine, I'm sure you've worked on an app that it might not be really big, but it's not, a side project or a pet app anymore. It is literally impossible to test it manually. You just don't have the manpower to do it. You have several pages, you have several roles, you have several custom rules. There's no way to manually go into. You might even do it every once in a while, but you cannot do it every day, and you cannot do it on every push to the repo. So that's why tests are important. The thing is with tests is you write the test once, but it works for you forever until you have to change that piece of code. The test is running all the time. So I'm sure some of you must have experienced this. you have a piece of the app that you got to change, and it relies on a dependency. And you go, oh, okay, to fix this, I got to change this code here on this dependency. And you change it, and it breaks another piece of the app that you didn't know of. And you only find out about this when a user reports a bug, or a teammate spots the issue. But that happens much more often than it should. And this is why tests are so important, because you can spend a small a small piece of time. You can spend, even with fast, it's even easier, but you can spend a little bit of time to make sure that you're not going to have issues later down the road. So sometimes I like to think of, when I'm explaining this, I like to think of tasks as stocks that might be a little bit expensive, but they pay themselves real quickly. I mean, ridiculously fast. If you just look at those numbers, I mean, does it make sense not to write tests when you have such an upside? So take a look at this arrow. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that unit tests are not worth it or anything like that, but that's pretty much it. Unit tests are simple tests. They are easier to write. They involve less dependencies. They involve less entities. They don't cover as much as the feature or system tests that you have to the right of the arrow, but they're easier to write. They're faster. And on the right side, you have the feature and system tests that are more complex. Sometimes, if for instance, you have Laravel Dusk, which involves a browser. There are more variables. You have to write more code on your task. Usually, it requires more setup, so you have to really set up a scenario. If you have an e-commerce, for the checkout page, you're going to have to set a user, to set some products, set a billing address, set a fake payment gateway, all of that stuff. And they take a little bit longer to write, but they do provide more value in the sense that they test more things. So you can have lots of unit tests, and maybe your checkout doesn't work, but you can have feature tests for the checkout, and you can make sure the entire feature works. So moving on, I want to talk about simple, meaningful tests with PEST. And what I mean with this is, like I said, one of the reasons people don't write as many tests as they should, it's because sometimes they don't have enough time. Sometimes it takes too much time to write tests. It's too verbose. You have to write lots of classes, and you have to write lots of methods. So um, before I move on here, I want to say that I don't want to bash PHP Unit. PHP Unit's great, but PHP itself is a fairly verbose language, and because of this, PHP Unit is a little verbose as well. But it's great. PEST runs in PHP Unit. However, I'm saying this from my experience. It may vary depending on who's saying this, but I've been working for a while as a freelancer, and one of the things I do is introduce tests in certain organizations. And one of the things I noticed is, even when people test their applications, sometimes they don't test as much, because there's the whole boilerplate of creating a new method, creating a new class, and writing all this stuff. So if you want to have a simple test, you need to have at least, I don't know, 6 lines just to have a class, more a couple lines to have a method. So it might not be, as in they go and say, oh, I'm not going to test this, but they might, I'm not a psychologist, but they might just go, they might just go, oh, let's just skip this. And that's what happens. Sometimes they don't write as many tests as they should. I don't write as many tests as they should as well. But one of the things that I love about PEST is how simple it is. Both the tests and it's the expectation API as well. And thanks, Luke, for that. So when you remove that entry barrier, because there is an entry barrier for tests, and Laravel makes it so much easier, but still there's, it's a little bit complicated. You have to set up some things. When you remove that, everything becomes so much easier. So I want to give you guys a few examples of tests that are super simple, that may seem silly, but they pay off greatly in the long run. And again, you can do this with PHP Unit as well. I'm using PEST because I love the syntax, I love the API, I love how it works. So let's move on. So how many tests do we have on this file? If you take a quick glimpse, you might go and say, hey, we have 3 tests. But the truth is, we have 5 tests there. Because take a look at this first test. Don't even read the beginning. Go to the last line. We have the with method, which is a data set on PEST, and PHP Unit also has this. But look how simple it is to set up a test with a data set on PEST. So If we go and read this test very carefully, it loads the dashboard for every type of user. Imagine you have an application and you have certain roles. And on the dashboard page, you might display different things depending on the role. So if it's an admin, you might show the monthly recurring revenue of your app. If it's excuse me, if it's a manager, you might want to show how many users they're handling. If it's a user, you might want to show data related to their profile. So this test is as simple as it gets. It acts as a user. If you don't know what it is, it's tricking Laravel into thinking it's logged in as that user. And we create a user inside the method itself just to save some space. So we're calling user factory and we're creating a user. But you can see that we're passing this role to the factory, and we're getting this role from the data set. So this task is actually going to run 3 times, one for role admin, one for role manager, and one for role user. So you have 3 tasks on one. And then the task simply makes a GET request to the dashboard route, URL, and then it makes sure the response was okay. So you might think, okay, this is super silly. Why would I write a task for something so simple and for the dashboard, which is probably the first page users access? And that's the thing. You have 3 roles here. So are you really going to test this for each type of user every time you make a change? Because that's why this task is a protection for a disaster scenario. I'm sure some of you may have went through this, but I mean, you have a view and you change something and you have a typo. You have a typo in a variable. And when you test it, you get the undefined variable error. And sometimes you change something and you don't test it right away. It's a small verbiage change. You just, it's simple. Let me just change this and deploy. And when you open up the app, it's broken. That happens super often. And this super silly, simple test, it won't guarantee that the admin is going to see what they should. It's not going to guarantee that the manager is going to see what they should, but it is going to guarantee that your app will not crash because of a typo, because of a wrong if condition, because you're calling a method that doesn't exist in an object. That's simply not going to happen because you have a test running all the time. And if the dashboard page uses a dependency, for instance, you could use a method on the user model. What could happen is you could change this method to be used in someplace else, and it could break the dashboard page. And this test would catch it. So it's a super silly, simple test. It has 5 lines, and it can save you from crashing your app. And I think almost every developer has gone through this. Make a quick, small change that you're super confident of, and it breaks the app. And that's the catch. You cannot be confident on making changes without tests. You might think you are confident, but you're not, because you cannot make sure the app works. And that's why tests are so important. Tests allow me to sleep at night. I can get a pull request at 11 p.m. If the tests pass, I know it's working, and I can sleep safely. I don't have to be worried about making sure the app's working, checking flare or bugs, negative for exceptions. It gives me this peace of mind. So again, data sets, simple tests. We have 3 tests in one. And you probably wouldn't test each user role every time you make a change. I know you might say you will, but you won't. And one more thing, the cool thing about those tests is that they're really simple to write. You can write this test in less than 2 minutes. You don't need to have a lot of experience to write it. So one of the other things with testing is that usually you got to write them along with the code. Sometimes we lie to ourselves and say, oh no, I'm going to write the code and then we're going to test it. And for some people, that's fine. But I would say for the majority of people, including me, that doesn't work. Sometimes I write the code and I write a few tests, but not as many as I should have. And I'm not even saying about test-driven development. I'm not talking about writing the test first. I'm just saying about writing the test along with the feature. So if you added a small feature to your code, just create a small test. Sometimes you don't have time to write it, just leave it empty and make sure you come back to it. So that's one of the cool things about this type of test. Moving on to the next one. It redirects a user, an authenticated user, to the login page. You might think, okay, this is dumb. This is probably done through a middleware. Why would you want to test this? And that's exactly it. Imagine you forgot to add the middleware. Imagine someone removed it. Imagine there's a huge pull request that removed it by mistake. Why would you, refuse to have this level of content that you can get with 3 lines? Look at this. This uses higher order tests, which is a super cool feature from PEST. We don't even have to pass a closure. We can just chain methods, and we have a test running with 3 lines. And if I wish to, I can make this 1 line. It's just going to be very big. So this is an example of test that might seem silly, that might seem unnecessary, because the auth middleware is already tested on Laravel. But we as people, as humans, we make mistakes more often than we should, more often than we would like. So I don't see a reason not to have this reassurance with 3 small lines. The same goes for the last test. A disable account is redirected to the payment page. Imagine you have your own implementation, your own payment implementation, and once the user is, I don't know, it's been 3 days and they haven't paid, their account gets disabled. You can write a super simple test to make sure that if they try to access the dashboard, they go into the villain information page. And you may think, okay, this is silly. You can add a check. Okay, you can add a check, but can you make sure that it's always redirecting them to the villain information? What if you add an abort method there that throws a 401? So it's going to block their access to the dashboard page, but it's not going to take them to the villain information. So this is the kind of reassurance that I like to have, and that PEST makes so easy, because not only is this readable, if you get someone who's not a developer, they might not really understand the actiness method and the user factor method. But if you explain this to them, they're going to understand the entire thing real quickly. And let's move on to the next test. So here's an example that I wasn't going to include it, but I think I should. Sometimes you have static pages on your app, and I'm saying this because it happened to me on a team I worked with. A typo can break a page. You might have a wrong method. You might have a missing object. So with data sets and PEST, you might have seen this being called as smoke testing, but you can make this kind of test real quick. You just pass a data set with the path of some pages, and you can have a test running in what does it take me to write this? 1 minute, 2 minutes, making sure those pages load, including the home page, which is probably the most important page of your application. So simple test. You might think it doesn't provide much value, but it saves you from the disaster scenario, the scenario where someone is half asleep and it's 11 p.m. and they change something on the homepage real quick because someone asks to, and push it to production to go to sleep. And it's a typo and the app breaks. I'm sure some of you have been through this. And to the last examples, I want to talk a little bit about Mailables and notifications, because that's something that I see fail very often because of typos. You already have the Mailables in place, you already have the notifications in place, and sometimes you just want to do a copy change and you miss a variable, you change the name of the variable, you call a method that doesn't exist, and it breaks the Mailable. It's not going to render. So take a look at this first test. It builds the Mailable properly. So, I mean, you don't have much context out of this. It's just saying that it builds the Mailable. And if you take a look at the text, it's just creating an instance of this payment failed email, passing a user as an argument. And then we use the expectation API from PEST to make sure the subject is what we want it to be. But we could even ignore this. We could ignore the subject. Focus on the last line, the render not to be null. So you might be thinking, okay, what is this? So it makes sure that you avoid the disaster scenario. Because if you try to call render and you have an undefined variable, or you try to call a method on, that happens super often when you have a relationship and you don't have the relationship loaded, it doesn't exist on the database, and you try to call a method on no. I'm sure all of you have seen this error. Try to call blah 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 on no. It saves you from this. It's a super simple task, but it makes sure the Mailable renders, and you won't be surprised when the app is live and the whole thing breaks and you cannot send emails because there was a typo on an email. That happened to me, and I'm sure it happens to other people. And the same example goes to notifications. If you've ever used Laravel notifications, it basically wraps over Mailables, and it allows you to write emails using the notification API. So instead of writing HTML, you can write a couple methods. You can call the action method, you can call the text method, and you can build your own notifications. So same thing, just create a notification. You can see that it added an additional exception just to make sure the notification is going to be sent through the proper channels, so mail and Slack. But that's something you could leave out as well. The focus on is on the message object. When you call the to mail method, which is what actually it sends, it's when you get the mailable object. Not a mailable, actually, it's a mail message object. That's when you have your actual message. So if you have a typo on that method and you just test, new payment failed notification, you might not catch it. But if you test the mail message, you're going to catch it. So you might have the wrong subject, the wrong action text, the wrong action URL. But if you have a disaster there, this test is going to catch it as well. So I would say this presentation is mostly about avoiding disaster scenarios with cheap alternatives. If you go back real quick, how do I go back? Okay. Let's take a look at this test real quick. I know it's being a little over 15 minutes, but I want to look at it. Okay. This task is so simple that it's a little bit ridiculous. Like, you write this and you go like, am I really testing something? Because it's super simple. It's just a GET request. It doesn't do anything fancy. And I'm a huge fan of feature tests. So the tests I like to write are usually, fairly big. They test a lot of things. They're complex. But this one that's child's play. And the way PEST allows you to quickly spin up tests, set up data sets, use the expectation API, which is super robust. It just makes the entire testing experience much more pleasurable, which means that you're likely to write more tests. So if you like to write tests, you will likely write more tests. And if tests are easy to write and fast to write, you are going to write more tests. And when you write this kind of tests, which is, I don't have a name for them, but simple, meaningful, expressive tests, anyone can understand what the test does by its name. Anyone can understand what the test does real quick by reading it, and it saves you from the disaster scenario anytime you're going to push to your Git repo or that you deploy your code. So yeah, this is my talk. Let me go back to the last slide, which is a thank you page. So thank you all for watching, and thanks, Nino, for giving me the opportunity to talk here. If you've enjoyed this talk, you can keep in touch with me and up to date with everything I do, mainly through Twitter. I have my YouTube channel as well with lots of free lessons. There's my blog with some blog posts. There's my TTD course, and there's also my free 30 days of Laravel course. So I hope you guys were able to take out something from this talk. Take everything with a little grain of salt. The time is limited, but like I said, this is not a technical talk. It's more of a concept talk, and maybe mind opening for some of you to understand how valuable tests is. Because we talk about how how important tests are all the time, but it's the kind of thing that's hard to measure, because if you don't get an error because you had a test, how are you going to know that you did not get an error because you had a test? How are you going to know that you would have gotten the error if you didn't have a test? So that's the kind of thing that's hard to measure. But when you go back to the math, it starts to make sense real quickly. So thank you all for watching again. And yeah, that's pretty much it, I think.